So this is a video by Novara Media about the failings of the Met Police. Let's go ahead and let's watch it.
Late in the summer of 2014, a body was found by a dog walker in the grounds of St Margaret's Church in Barking. The body was that of 22-year-old Gabriel Cavari, also known as Gabriel Klein. Just 3 weeks later, another body was found. It was 21-year-old Daniel Whitworth, who was found by the very same dog walker in the very same spot in the churchyard. Both men were gay, both had died of GHB overdoses, and both were found in the same position, propped up against the churchyard wall, their t-shirts lifted up to expose their stomachs. Less than a year later, the body of a third man, 25-year-old Jack Taylor, was found.
He was at that point, you have to get that. That is that to me is the first sign of a failing police force. You watch that spot, obviously. It's fairly simple policing.
Propped up on the other side of the churchyard wall, his t-shirt lifted up, his midriff exposed. He too had died from a GHB overdose. This is Stephen Port. He was convicted in 2016 of the murder, rape and poisoning of these 3 young men. He was sentenced to life in prison with a whole life order. He will never be released. It's a tragic, sickening story about a vile murderer and young, innocent victims. It's also, though, one about police failure, because Gabriel Cavari, Daniel Whitworth and Jack Taylor were not the first young men killed by Stephen Port. In June 2014, Port had raped and murdered Anthony Walgate. He was aged 23. After killing Walgate, he dumped his body outside his flat, propped up against the wall with his belly exposed. After he dumped the body, he made this call to 999.
Emergency ambulance. What's the address of the emergency?
Cook Street. There's a young boy who got his cups outside. I don't know.
Outside of which number?
4758.
Sorry?
4758, I think.
47 Cook Street.
Yeah.
What area?
Barking. It looks like he's collapsed or had a seizure or something. He's always just drunk.
That claim that he had merely found the young boy outside was a lie. And after repeatedly changing his story, the police arrested Port for perverting the course of justice. They never opened a murder investigation after the deaths of Cavari and Whitworth. That was despite the urging of friends and family. The details of these later cases make that oversight on the part of the police almost unbelievable, and there were multiple clues as to what was actually happening. Daniel Whitworth, Port's third victim, was found with what
it's just,
purported to be a suicide note. It read, I am sorry to everyone, mainly my family, but I can't go on anymore. I took the life of my friend Gabriel Klein. We was just having...
dodgy.
Some fun at a mate's place, and I got carried away and gave him another shot of G. I didn't notice while we was having sex that he had stopped breathing. I tried everything to get him to breathe again, but it was too late. It was an accident, but I blame myself for what happened, and I didn't tell my family I went out. I know I would go to prison if I go to the police, and I can't do that to my family, and at least this way I can at least be with Gabriel again. I hope he will forgive me. The note finished by saying, by the way, please do not blame the guy I was with last night. We only had sex, then I left. He knows nothing of what I have done. I have taken what G I have left with sleeping pills, so if it does kill me, it's what I deserve. Feeling dizzy now, as took 10 minutes ago, so hoping you understand my writing. The guy he was with the night before was his killer, Stephen Port.
Now, can I ask, if you are a police officer and you read in a suicide note, don't blame the guy who this person's just being killed. Don't blame the guy. If I was a police officer going, this fella's probably he probably murdered the person. Because most suicide notes don't tend to finish with, oh, by the way, don't blame this person who could be the murderer, generally most suicides tend not to be in that position because, it tends to be more, like, don't blame that person who's not at all in any way, no way that they could have done a murder, that kind of thing. It's generally the person who very clearly is the main suspect if that was a murder inquiry. If I was a police officer, yeah, I think I'd be submitting that suicide note as evidence of murder, to be honest, because that little section there really kind of, it's basically a confession, really, to be honest, to me on the murderer's side.
Port, and it was Port who wrote this fake suicide note, which was intended to absolve him of not one, but two murders.
Yeah.
The police accepted it at face.
Why? Exactly. How thick can you be? I'm not a fully qualified police officer, but guess what? I can look at that and go, yeah, no, that looks suspicious. That looks like that person is definitely a murderer. No one really tends to write that because it's really not something that's typically, what you'd expect to think. Like, oh, yes, this person I was with last night, don't blame them. Why would we blame them exactly? We don't know anything about them unless we did investigations into them, and then maybe we would know something about them. But of course, we don't do investigations if we thought that they were involved somehow. But we wouldn't think they're involved because it's a suicide. Oh, wait, no. See?
Value. Whitworth's parents, for their part, never believed that the handwriting was that of their son. This didn't stop a Met police officer from claiming at an earlier inquest that his father had confirmed it. It later turned out that rather than consulting handwriting experts, as the police had promised, they simply compared the note to Whitworth's diary entries.
Great idea, yeah. Just randomly check the diary entries. Great.
Any discrepancies were put down to Whitworth being in a strange state of mind when he wrote it.
What?
Even worse, Ricky Wormsley, who's Whitworth's partner...
Oh, we just do that for checks now. If I have a checkbook, I go, yeah, it's a check from Jeff Bezos. He says to give me $1 billion. That's not his writing. No, he was just a bit distressed. That's all it is. Yeah, no. That's not how life works with serious matters when, people in power are concerned. But of course, this is what happens, I guess, when you've got a corrupt police force.
Was not even allowed to see the note because being Whitworth's partner was not enough to make him next of kin.
That's dodgy.
I did ask if I could see the letter myself, but the response I got was, sorry, you're next of kin, so we can't show. Yeah, I believe it's a mixture of everything. So, a bit of laziness, incompetence, lack of training, but I absolutely stand by that they were being homophobic towards these four victims and making...
To be honest, that gets closer and closer to the point that you almost wouldn't be surprised if there was involvement in crime, to be honest, on the police officer's side, to be honest, because it's a bit, it's like withholding evidence is a pretty serious part. Like that'll get your case thrown out. If they were the defense, and that was if that was the defense, yeah, your case would be thrown out because you can't withhold evidence. That's withholding evidence.
General assumption
of murder. That note is evidence of murder. Like it's pretty clear evidence of murder, to be honest.
That they're all young gay men who take drugs, and they also, I believe, just looked at that letter and just took it at face value.
But that's not even what you'd say about a letter of that particular kind of writing. Like that wouldn't matter. Taking it as face value would be weird. Because that's not even a typical suicide letter. That's not like, oh, if we'd investigated this further, we would have realized that's false. It's even looking at that letter. I can see, looking there, without even doing any additional evidence, I can see that that is a dodgy thing. That looks dodgy. That seems weird that's there. Looking at that, you think, okay, but why is that in there? Why is it suddenly like, oh, don't blame this fella here, don't interview him? Oh, why not? Why would he be concerned? Because that seems more like, that seems very concerning, If the person actually wrote it, it would be a bit weird, wouldn't it? Why is this person ensuring that we don't investigate this? But that's weird. So, regardless of what you think occurred, that would be a weird thing. That should set off alarm bells. That last bit there.
If Walmsley had been able to see that note and recognise it as a fake, it seems likely that the life of Port's final victim, Jack Taylor, could have been saved.
Yeah.
However, even after Taylor's death, the police initially refused to open a murder investigation. After these 4 deaths in the same neighbourhood and in the same suspicious...
And come on. What, do you think multiple people went into a churchyard? Oh, yeah. And they all died with the same thing, and all their bodies were in the same condition. That's like, if they're not murders, they're clearly not, like, you have to be concerned. Because if they're not murders, there's some sickos who like to do things with dead bodies then.
Circumstances, it was only after the family of the final victim drew a connection between the 4 victims that the police were forced into action. After initially dismissing their approaches, it was a month after Taylor's death that his family convinced the police to publish this CCTV image of Taylor and Port walking together on the night of his death. Almost immediately, someone in the force recognised Port as known to them. The case was passed to the homicide team, and 2 days later, 16 months after he took his first victim, Port was arrested for murder.
Yeah.
Every detail of this story just gets more...
And all that time, they should have known. After that first incident there, and that piece of writing there at the end, that should have been the thing that, tells you that fella is a murderer.
More and more shocking. 3 young men died because the police wouldn't do the job they're paid to do. And we have to ask, what made this possible? Well, the families of Port's victims are clear. This is the sister of Jack Taylor.
We was worried, are the police doing their job? Why haven't they been in contact with us? We had absolutely no support whatsoever because they made assumptions of what had happened to Jack. They just thought he had taken drugs, he had overdosed, there was nothing suspicious there.
Stephen Port.
There is something suspicious, though. Like, that... No, I mean, like, even if you make the assumption, there's suspicion, surely. That's not just homophobia, these people, That's literally ignoring outstanding evidence. As I said before, it's not like, you shouldn't, like, the homophobia stopped you from investigating it further. It's the homophobia made you ignore the evidence that was already put in front of your eyes. That, it's not, treating people differently, they don't investigate it properly. It's like, they just ignore the evidence they already have. Which is,
Took Jack's life. And was able to take Jack's life. Because that's the long and short of it. He was able to. He was allowed to. Because they could have caught him way before. If they'd looked into anything at all, then they could have saved other lives.
Last Friday, an inquest into the deaths of Port's victims came to a close. The jury judged that astounding police failings probably contributed to the murders of the last 3 victims. The coroner, however, ruled that the jury could not make a judgment about whether the investigation was blighted by homophobia. The Met apparently fought tooth and nail to keep that issue out. The spokesman for the families had this to say.
We are incensed by the police's successful attempts to prevent the jury from examining whether prejudice played any part in the police's actions.
Yeah.
The coroner did not rule that the police were not homophobic, and our position remains unchanged. Based on the treatment we received, our firmly held belief is that the Metropolitan Police's actions were, in part, driven by homophobia.
Of course they were. Like, what can you expect?
Helen Ball, Assistant Commissioner for the Met, denied that the countless errors in the investigation had anything at all to do with homophobia.
I don't think the Met is institutionally homophobic, and I don't think that my colleagues are homophobic as well. I don't think that has been an issue in these investigations.
Really, do you know? Because I do. I think most people are homophobic, actually. I see it all the time. You know? All the time. And that ranges from slurs being used, as insults. Like, calling people gay as an insult. And also up until you reach, full on, not viewing people as human beings. It's like you can't have an excuse. Of course, your Metropolitan Police is going to be homophobic. If people are, like, what do you think there is? You think there's some sort of magic sort of thing in the Metropolitan Police training program that just, like, removes all homophobia? Or, like, there's, oh, no, every single person who's homophobic, they aren't allowed to enter here. No. If the population is homophobic, the police are most likely going to be more so, because people who are, not that great are going to go into the police. That's just kind of how it happens. It's sort of what happens.
Investigations, it was a range of different mistakes, leads that weren't followed.
No, not leads that weren't followed. Deliberately ignoring evidence. That's not leads that weren't followed. That wasn't like, oh, we should investigate this further. No, no. This is evidence. In fact, it's evidence enough for me to go, yeah, that person's definitely suspect. It's like, you could base a murder conviction just off of that note. Just off that little section of that note, you could base a murder investigation. Really, I mean that. You could even possibly get a conviction out of that.
Curiosity that perhaps wasn't quite there, things that weren't tied up and understood to be contributing.
The excuses there, curiosity that wasn't quite there, things that weren't tied up and understood to be contributing.
You've got to start, I think, from quite what might seem counterintuitive, which is that the job of the police is not to solve crimes. That might seem counterintuitive. The job of the police, historically, the reason why they were created was to maintain public order. And that is an argument you can find made, repeatedly in some pretty good scholarship on the matter. And if you look at actually...
Not to, solve them, stop them from occurring, in the sense, though, of, arresting people. Originally executing everyone. Not originally, but there's been sectors of the world that are just they're fine, just execute every single person. You stole some bread, execution. You murdered someone, execution. That sort of thing. It means that you don't. It causes a problem, because then crime elevates. It's like, well, if you steal a piece of bread, then you may as well do anything. But what it does mean is that it means that you say, if you commit any crime, you're going to die. And if you solve crimes, quick enough, if you get the person quick enough, it means that they can't do anything more, and it means that you do push down the rate of crime. Of course, it pushes it up again, because while the amount of people committing crimes drops if you execute everyone, the amount of crimes overall committed rise, because the people committing them are now, there's no real point to stopping. But if you, have a system in which it's just, basically just saying police forces are,
Actually, the number of cases solved in the UK, I think now it's abysmally low. It's terrifyingly low. But even if it's high watermark, I think in the early 2010s, because you had all this investment from New Labour, I think only about 15% of reported crimes were solved. Reported crimes.
A lot of them get dropped due to racism, misogyny, a lot of stuff like that. Incompetence, lack of concern, all sorts of things. And keep in mind, that's just a report. That's using probably police data, which would just be if someone's oh, there was no crime committed, it was a mistake. there was such and such, which, means that the majority of cases that are down that get swiped because of corruption, they probably aren't counted. The cases that are like due to like homophobia, that means the police do investigate it, but they just don't actually do anything. They would not be counted. All sorts of things. So would that probably drop the rate significantly. Net crimes.
That's about 7.5%, I think. But that isn't really their job. Their job is to act as a certain kind of bureaucracy to process things quickly. And there's a reason why crimes that happen, often violent crimes, and you get nothing more than a crime reference number. And yet when there's a protest, you see dozens, if not hundreds of police somewhere. Because public order is that raison d'etre. And I think we do need, as a society, a broader conversation around what their role is. And I think, sadly, too many people have been taken in by the kind of media spectacle of, crime dramas and, Netflix series. That isn't really the bread and butter of what policing looks like. And this is really horrific. Yeah. I mean, this is really horrific. Not even I thought it was this brazenly bad. Of course, we see it repeatedly in regards to race. And we've seen it with the Sarah Everard case and others.
Well, with race, it's, especially in America, because, obviously people have guns in America. So, it's a lot like if you've got a gun and you shoot someone. In my country, it's like, well, if you don't have a license, you are probably going to get convicted of murder, because, like, I don't see how did you have that exactly. In countries with guns, there's a lot more of an issue because gun violence can be you can excuse, oh no, I felt I was threatened, or oh such and such, or I was a mistake. It's like, no, but it can't be a mistake because you're not supposed to have a gun. But of course, in countries where you're allowed to have guns, that's the thing. But of course, when you've got a country where police have guns, that brings back in that issue of then the police can have all these excuses, and that's an issue there.
With regards to gender violence against women, you can go back to the mid-1990s, 1997, of course, with Stephen Lawrence. Substantively, I don't think that much has changed. In terms of accountability and saying, you're not doing your job, you're not serving the public like you should, and means to recourse and doing something about it, and proper scrutiny, and the default of both political parties to the police, even under Jeremy Corbyn, and the media coverage, terrifying. Absolutely terrifying. This is an organisation, let's talk about the London Metropolitan Police Service, which has billions of pounds in its budget, has extraordinary authority over people's lives, is answerable to the Home Secretary, and yet there doesn't seem like basic mechanisms of accountability and scrutiny when it comes to things like this. When it comes to
I think it is also an issue that, like the police are answerable to the Home Secretary, because it brings into an issue when you've got corrupt politicians, because as I said, obviously, when it comes to it, you can argue that politicians inherently, while they aren't the reason police are corrupt, they will add to the corruption.
Whether or not they uphold the values which as a society we care about. You'd think that's quite important. And the thing is, no politician wants to touch it. It's a hot potato because they see the cost as being too high. You don't start a political fight with the police. You don't call them out on things because you don't come out of that the winner.
I mean, just saying, not necessarily. It can be, just saying, if you do certain things, obviously, once again, those things are not actually going to change anything. They're just going to be a facade. But the point is, they will make you popular, possibly, because of what you can do is you can say, I've solved racism in the police. I've solved sexism in the police. Obviously, you haven't actually. That's not actually doing anything. So as a politician, you haven't actually done anything. But what I'm saying is picking fight with police can lead to good things for you because it can seem as if you've solved problems, even if you haven't.
I assume it's a mixture of two things going on here, which is one, as you say, the police aren't actually very good at investigating crime. Like this is just incompetence after incompetence after incompetence.
Well, in that case, that's not incompetence. That's deliberately ignoring basic intelligence. That's basic intelligence. That doesn't like police have years of training. If a police officer is investigating, they'll have had years in a police force. That is not bad at your job. That's bad at basic intelligence.
The other, I think, the prejudice, I mean, I presume there's some homophobia. I believe the partner of one of the victims, when he says that he would have been treated differently if they were in a heterosexual relationship, that seems entirely plausible to me. I think probably, you know, the overarching story of what's going on.
I'm not sure if it was a heterosexual relationship and, you know, and the person being murdered was female, maybe not, because there's misogyny too.
Going on here is that the police didn't think that these victims were real victims. No, they didn't really think that they were worth investigating, and that was potentially partly because they were gay. I think it was probably a lot to do with that they had overdosed. Well, they hadn't overdosed on drugs. They've been poisoned with drugs. But the police just read it as, oh, these are just gay guys who have chemsex. They take dangerous drugs. It would be a waste of police time, essentially, for us to investigate this properly. So we're just going to push.
The problem with that, though, is that it's not inherently, like, that's not even a good argument, even if you are a police officer. Obviously, there's a shit argument to begin with, but, like, even if you were a police officer, like, you know, trying to argue towards even another prejudiced police officer. Like, if you're a prejudiced police officer, even you would have to say, hold on a second, though, that's not a lack of evidence and you just weren't bothered finding out the evidence. There was evidence there that there was someone who killed the person, you know? That's pretty suspicious, that little note there. I know I keep harking on about this, but it is pretty suspicious. You need to think about that and think that is, in real terms, that case is, in particular, is not so much, oh, you aren't bothered finding out any more information. It's you didn't look at the information you were given, which is not laziness. It's deliberately not bothering.
Push it over there. You know, loads of people fit into that category.
Yeah.
Drug takers, sex workers, people who are homeless, people from certain ethnic backgrounds, people who the police don't think it's their job to serve, even if they, you know, I think they serve, you know, almost everyone quite poorly. But these are the people they don't even bother at all, and that just seems like what has.
I think what it is not homophobia is leading them to do that. I think what homophobia is leading them to go. They know they won't get a rap on the knuckles when their superior officer goes, yeah, so you had a look at the investigation. So you had evidence of the person clearly there murdering them, but you didn't investigate anything. You know, if that, and that's the point. It's not necessarily that they're homophobic, that's why they didn't investigate. It's because they know their superior officers are also homophobic, that they know they can get away with it if they don't do fucking anything, you know? If they do fucking nothing, like, you know? You know what I mean? Like, that's sort of the thing.
What has happened over and over again in this situation, which is they've just not felt like this is a job they need to do. And it seems pretty clear that 3 young men died as a result. The police knew that he had called 999 and lied. He had called 999 and said, I found this guy unconscious in the street. Actually, he dragged that guy out of his own room. That's the point when the flag should have been raised.
Was it the guy's apartment or was it the murderer's apartment? Because if it's the murderer's apartment, that's pretty suspicious. You know?
On his computer, there were all sorts of search terms which should have led them to recognize that there was a bigger story going on here. So some of the search terms which were on his computer: sleeping boy, unconscious boys, drugged and raped, taking date rape drug, gay teen knocked out raped, guy raped and tortured young nude.
Tortured? That should put you on the list, you know, on its own.
Boy. These searches were all made the day before he killed his first victim. The police, they seized his computer. They didn't bother looking. If they had, I presume, they would have drawn the connection, and the 3 young men would not have been.
Aren't some search terms which just land you on a list instantly? Like, everything that goes, like, for example, in America, everything that goes out of the country, which is practically everything, on data servers gets dragged in by the country's secret service and just gets up. And that's supposed to put you on a list, but apparently, no, they weren't bothered telling them about that.
Killed. 3 young lives would have been saved.
Yeah.
This is also not just a story about police failure, it's a story about police failing to investigate themselves, because there actually has already been a watchdog investigation into this case. It was completed in August 2018. Their full findings haven't been published yet, but in their summary, they write this. We and the Metropolitan Police Service agree that officers did not have a case to answer for misconduct or gross misconduct.
Wow.
We also agreed that the performance of 9 officers fell below the standard required, and they will need to undergo measures to ensure performance is improved. So essentially, no one did anything that wrong, but maybe we could send some of them on a training program.
Measures.
And despite...
Or maybe not. Measures. Maybe those measures could mean... imprisonment for, let's say 3-4 years, maybe 5, 6 possibly, for the lot of them, and permanently disbanded from the police force and access to no pension and all that sort of stuff. That's an option.
That recognition of at least some failures, the Belfast Times reports that none of the 17 officers involved were disciplined, and 7 were even promoted.
Oh my.
So the IOPC...
So they were promoted for being lazy and stupid. They didn't matter investigating further, and also they were stupid because they didn't even look at the evidence they even had. Don't know why that would get you a promotion, to be honest. I mean, that's not like, oh, they were a very fine officer. It's just that they were very homophobic. So they didn't bother investigating. But if this wasn't in this situation, if it was not, if there was no, issue surrounding homophobia, if it was a different case, they would have been fine. Now in this case, it's just like, no. They're just shit police officers, man. They're just bad at their job. Even without the discrimination, they're just bad at their job.
See, they didn't get any justice whatsoever. Basically, sounds to me like it was a whitewash, as I say.
Anyway,
So the IOPC, they didn't get any justice whatsoever.
Yeah.
Basically, sounds to me like it was a whitewash. As I say, the whole thing hasn't been published. It's only once you get a jury investigation that the any of the truth starts to come out. Even then, what they can consider is limited by what the judge will allow them to consider. They're not allowed to consider institutional homophobia.
I mean, like...
Do you see any route, Aaron, by which
I have to say, though,
the Metropolitan Police changes?
When it comes, this is obviously a side issue, but when it comes to strike that from your mind kind of nonsense, how exactly do you expect the jury to strike that from their mind? Like, if some jury person's like, oh, well, when your man told us that it's like, no, remember, the judge told us we weren't allowed to consider what your man said. It's like, well, that doesn't matter. If someone is a jury, they're, no offense meant, most likely not that intelligent when it comes to figuring out crimes. So, sure, the judge might say, strike that from your mind, or, you can't consider that. But so what? That doesn't really matter. The jury are not going to be like, oh, yes, I'll just remove that from my mind, like out of Harry Potter, No, it's, just like J.K. Rowling, transphobia, and all the rest is going to be there. If that's going to be there in the police's mind, you're going to, if that's not going to be, oh, I'll just try that from my mind. How does that exactly work? I know that's a bit of a side of the thing, but it's just, it's just a bit weird to me how exactly you can think that would work. But, anyway.
If not this, what?
Change for the Metropolitan Police Service would have to come out of something which looks like or resembles an existential threat. Now, how does the police respond to an existential threat? Well, we know they have more than 70 press officers, the Metropolitan Police Service, and they bombard journalists with a political line. They lobby them to cover certain stories, to not cover certain stories, to conceal certain data.
This is something that I believe I've talked about before, which is when it comes to criminal investigation sort of officers, you do have institutions where it's like, for example, there was a example of a journalist, some stuff there where you had from like Last Week Tonight, where they were talking about law and order, and how law and order has been used for many, many years as basically police propaganda. So they'll just not talk about the police being wrong. Oh no, police can't be wrong. No. They can be incorrect from time to time, but they can't be wrong, people. No. Now and again they might make a mistake, but they can't be racist or homophobic or transphobic or misogynistic or sexist. No. They can't be patriarchal at all. No, how could they be that? No, not a chance of it. That kind of thing. And it's the same case in the UK and in most countries. And even if you have a country that doesn't really care, its police force isn't involved in PR and communicating with these kind of TV shows and saying, we'll give you access to our patrol cars and our police vehicles and all these things if you do the line. Even if they aren't doing that, the fact that if you've got, like, for example, let's say my police force, my country, absolutely just nothing to encourage shows made in my country to be pro-police. They do nothing to that. They're just fine with the police being insulted in shows and being shown to be that as they are. But it doesn't matter, because people in my country are watching English shows that defend the police because they're getting support from them, or American shows that are doing the same. It doesn't really matter, because even if the country itself police force isn't forcing that country's media to follow their line, it doesn't matter, because other countries' media will affect, like, people like myself's sort of perception about the police force. I would say police force in my country are probably fairly corrupt. Fairly corrupt, I would say. It's just sort of something you think about, and that's the thing. Like, you see that with the likes of America, with the military, for example. It's the same with the police force and the military. You have this sort of situation where the military are seen in films in which the military are portrayed as good, or they might make a mistake, but it's not racism. It's not intentional problems. It's not, they didn't invade that country. It was an accident. That time when they murdered all those civilians, that was an accident. It wasn't intentional, that they just weren't bothered about civilian deaths. No, then if you're towing that line, you get your vehicles, you get your locations, you get to shoot on a real military base, you get to shoot on a real police station. Wow, lucky you. This, it's a problem. It really is.
Later, what would happen with the political establishment? Well, they wouldn't say much. And if they did attack the police, the force of the tabloid media, the print media on them would be extraordinary. So we do have this complex in this country, this nexus of power between billionaire oligarch media, between ultimately a frightened political class, at best, even the good ones, between a hugely well-resourced organization, which is the Metropolitan Police Service.
Yeah, other ones, it is true. I'm not sure if this is released yet, but I wrote an episode before of a show I was on. Obviously, I'm not I don't have like a TV show or anything like that. So this didn't get any views, but it's a YouTube thing. And it was basically like this politician is like to this billionaire. They're like a mega billionaire oligarch. They're like, I run the army. I'm in charge of the army. So if you want to threaten me, be aware. I can order your ship that you sail on to be blasted into the stratosphere using our weapons. So just don't threaten me is basically the argument. But obviously, sure, the mega billionaire oligarchs are pretty safe. But if you're a journalist who's not very well known, you don't have a platform, and your platform is just going to ditch you, Like, let's say someone from the Sun newspaper is arrested in China, and they're kept in a prison, and they know that, and the Sun newspaper knows they're kept in prison. And let's say the Sun don't really like the Chinese at that moment. So Rupert goes, okay, what I want you to say is attack the Chinese there. So they, of course, spread our hands, boom, boom, boom. But what if instead it was something else, someone who the Sun is fine with. Suddenly, then, no one talks about that. That just gets ignored. So that, sure, if you are in certain countries reporting on the news and you criticize the government, sure, you may be arrested, you may be in prison, you may be tortured, but yes, you will be defended by a news organization, and you may be brought back to your country with diplomatic intervention. But if you do that to the British police force, you may not. A police officer may arrest you. A police officer may beat you up. All of these things may happen to you. And your newspaper is not going to care. Your news outlet is not going to report on that. Because they are not against them. And there's no reason for them to say anything. Keep silent.
Of course, Greater Manchester Police, West Midlands Police, Yorkshire Police, etc. But, the London Met is a huge organisation. And like I say, by virtue of what would have to happen, their response is fight. It's not flight, it's fight.
Yeah. It's
you look at the Duggan event, for instance, Mark Duggan killed by the police. You have riots as a response to that. Now, the instinct from the media and the political class and the Met was to say this was just tens of thousands of people randomly decided to get violent, and there were no deeper economic grievances. There were no deeper grievances with policing more generally. You see it in the early 80s with riots in Brixton and Toxteth. Yeah, some people start talking about community policing. Oh, it's not like it used to be. I'm sure it isn't like it used to be, right? In terms of people getting the shit kicked out of them for doing nothing. I'm sure it happens far less than it used to. Well, we know it happens far less than it used to.
I think that might partially be part of people being like, actually, sometimes you can kick the shit out of a police officer. I'm just saying, if Michael is walking down, sorry, Michael, no, I will choose a better name then. If Seamus is walking down the road and he's a police officer, and he's walking down the road and he beats the hell out of someone, right? Beats him up. Then Seamus, if he's a lower police officer, who's to stop Seamus from doing that? Well, someone else can beat him up. And that's the thing. It's that generally violence tends to have to be met with violence when diplomatic means don't work. This is why revolutions happen. This is why bloody things happen. This is why people get slaughtered in wars and such, because you've got one set of people who are not always in the right, and possibly neither is the other section, and then they sort of don't agree, and they, sometimes they use diplomacy, sometimes they don't, and then boom, crash, and sometimes it ends up in a stalemate with a lot of bloodshed, and sometimes it ends up in a winning, and not always in a good side winning. And I wouldn't say, you shouldn't always say good side, for example, and I've said it before, I think I may be misunderstood. I've said the Nazis aren't necessarily the worst people in human history. Now, the reason, obviously, I've said that was because it's not necessarily, you can't necessarily say, oh, the Nazis were evil, but that was the good side. No, the Nazis were very, very evil, obviously. That's, but the point is, when you're in a fight, sometimes you can have extremely evil and also kind of extremely evil, just not the same, It's like, do you want to slaughter 1 million people and get this bag of money? Or do you want to slaughter 1 million people and get the bag of money? Oh, you want to slaughter it? Okay, well, you're going to have to fight for that. Yeah? Okay, so now, oh, look at that. Yeah, looks like an extra 20 million people died. In just one place. It's like that's basically what occurs here, where anyway.
And you hear about some of the stories, for instance, in regards to, I think there was a police station in Dalston in the 80s, a special branch, Scotland Yard, and how they were dealing with sort of political activists in the 70s and the 80s.
Nice.
Things have changed, methods have changed. But no, I don't think they will.
Say though, it's a bit weird for police to be dealing in political affairs. Sure, that should be, Secret Service and stuff, because it's not a crime necessarily to be a fascist, because if it was, practically half the Republican Party in America would be arrested. It's a crime to act on those opinions. If you think your so-called race are better than others, it would be a crime to act on that. If you wanted to kill people or anything like that, but it wouldn't necessarily be a crime to just believe that, if you know what I mean. So I don't see why the police are investigating that. Like, surely that should be basically the secret police,
Ever face accountability? Accountability and scrutiny for the London Metropolitan Police Service and other police forces looks like a threat. And that's the problem here.
Yeah.
That's the problem. So you can't have growth or constructive criticism or progress. Even somebody like Stephen Lawrence's parents, Michael. Stephen Lawrence, huge police failings. Everybody admits it. Even then, notwithstanding, the Lawrence family were monitored by undercover police officers for years afterwards.
It's disgusting.
Christopher Alder, Janet Alder, his sister, pressed for justice for her brother Christopher, another Black Briton. I think she once said at an event I spoke alongside her, she said, I think they discovered, 16, 17 plainclothes officers had infiltrated her at some point during her life, whether it was activist meetings or, whatever, trying to monitor what she was doing.
Yeah.
She was trying to get justice for her brother, Christopher Alder. People are entitled to Google that name if they want to know more about his case. So no, we won't. We won't, because they see scrutiny as a threat, and they're aided and abetted by the media and politicians in this country. We might see change in somewhere like Scotland.
Also, not great that Keir Starmer, as of this recording, is head of the Labour Party, who, let's just say, are probably, maybe the Liberal Democrats will be ones to get in power. I think, to be honest, at this point, they're probably better than the Labour Party, because, the Labour Party is moving more and more right-wing, and it's getting concerning, because at some point, the Labour Party are just going to be basically the Conservatives of a couple of years ago. The Conservatives will be the, UKIP of a couple of years ago. Whereas in Britain, a lot of politicians are moving further right wing, and that's the thing. As the fascists join the Conservative Party and the Conservatives join the Labour Party, we see this sort of situation where Keir Starmer, not a great person when it comes to policing, because there's been a few things there that have been a little bit of tip off. Or
Wales, because things are done a bit differently.
Maybe.
In terms of the centre, the British state, London reaching out, no chance.
Yeah. Yeah. That was Novara Media's video on the horrific failings of the Metropolitan Police. And yeah, I think really with the Metropolitan Police, it's probably an extreme example in comparison to other countries, although I wouldn't necessarily go that far. I think it is seen in many countries. Probably one of the biggest is America. Obviously, you've got countries like Iran and a place like that where police force are more than that. But I think that's not necessarily, institutional misogyny in there. That's literally they're set up to do things. Like, they're set up to be misogynistic. They're set up to be like the police force were set like they were supposed to be homophobic 100 years ago. Like that was a hope that it was illegal to be gay. You know what I mean? It's like it wasn't just like, oh, the police are homophobic, so they'll arrest you for this crime which you didn't commit because of your sexual relationship. It's no. Your sexual relationship is illegal. It shouldn't be, but it is. It's the same thing in many countries where it's more outright. There isn't as much corruption. There isn't as much discrimination. It's just like, no, you are discriminated against in law. So it's not so much the police are deciding to discriminate against you, it's just that they're just following the laws. Obviously, the argument of just following orders is not a great argument, because, they weren't following orders. And, they got a promotion for not following orders. So, Anyway, so yeah, do go ahead, subscribe to Novara Media, like the videos, and yeah, their links will be in the description. Hopefully you'll come back next time, and yeah, see ya.